Okay. Hi, Jillian. How are you?
Hello, Doug. It's very nice to talk to you.
Nice to have you on the show. Thank you for coming on. Your bio is real interesting. And before we get to your new book, I just wanted to mention was Some Girls, was that your first book?
Some Girls was the first book that was published. Yes, it was a memoir about my time as the mistress of the Prince of Brunei, who at the time was the richest man in the world, or the youngest brother of the richest man in the world.
So he was the son or the brother of the Sultan of Brunei?
He was the brother of the Sultan of Brunei. He was the youngest brother. He was the playboy brother.
Okay. How did you meet him?
Oh, just bowling. Uh, I was being an actor in New York and I went to an audition, and this audition was to entertain in Singapore, sing and dance. I'm a song and dance girl. Okay. Um, and it became clear to me that when I went to the Ritz-Carlton for this interview that, this was not exactly on the up and up. Um, and it ended in a photo shoot in our underwear, which, as auditions do. And and I got a call weeks later, uh, actually, it's not a job. It's not in Singapore. You're being invited to be the personal guest of the Prince of Brunei at these parties he holds. Uh, every night. And, you'll be there for 2 weeks and you'll make $20,000, which to me, I mean, I hadn't turned 18 yet. I think I left for Brunei 3 days after I turned 18. They made sure. Um, I was like, $20,000. I've never heard of so much money. Um, and also, I've always been a bit of an edge liver, an edge pusher, and somebody who is curious and makes perhaps unwise decisions that turn into really good stories when you write them as books. So that is my first memoir, Some Girls. And I could say a lot of the same things about my new book coming out, Behold the Monster.
That was really the book that kind of put you on the map, though, right? It was a good story.
It's a hell of a
It's a hell of a
story. And
story.
yes,
Yeah.
it did put me on the map. I mean, it was, I think that I like to say that, when you've been involved in this sort of work or I mean,
Well, sure, it's
I,
work.
I was in
Yeah.
love with the guy too. Um, and and you write something that's a significant piece of literature, people look at you like their favorite dog just started talking. It's like, what? The dog talks? Oh my gosh. If I ever start a publishing company or a production company, I'm going to call it Talking Dog Productions. Uh, and it's true. I was there for a long time and I learned to sort of start to pay attention and to write down things in my journal that were more than just, oh, I need to lose 10 pounds. And I really think dentists and acting class is cute. But, and started to say, oh, this is how people talk. This is what things smell like. This is what things look like. And, so I could probably thank the Prince of Brunei for making me a writer.
You don't have any regrets. It was all part of life's rich tapestry.
Ah ouais, je ne regrette rien. Uh, of course. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
When I talk to my darling babysitter right now, I'm just like, just promise me two things. Like, no porn, no escort work, no heroin. anything else, call me at 4 in the morning and I will be there for you. But don't make a mistake you can't come back from.
Yeah.
And it was a mistake I couldn't come back from. Really, I live it to this day. And do I regret it? No. Would I do it again? Yeah, I probably. I got to see things that almost no one sees. I was at dinner with the King of Jordan and and like King Fahd of Saudi Arabia. I don't know what they were saying, but I was there. Um, and and when you take the narrative into your own hands, um, I think that it can turn these experiences that perhaps what I can't say don't regret it, but it also has given me a real meaning, like, and a purpose in life. And I fight for the rights of marginalized women, and I fight for people who, I mean, I speak. I don't fight necessarily. I actually also do fight, but like I really fight. I box. But I speak for the women in those situations who why don't I get to tell that story? Just because Prince Jeffrey is a prince and so much more powerful than me, I don't accept that. I get to tell my story, and that has really, I think, framed my career and my life in a way that's allowed me to metabolize a lot of unusual experiences.
Let's pivot over to your new book. It's called
Yes.
Behold the Monster. How did you get involved with this, with Sam
I was
Little?
writing a mystery novel. All I have ever wanted to be since I was 10 years old. I have the entire Nancy Drew collection right here. First edition. I bought it for myself when I sold my first book. I bought the entire first edition of Nancy Drew because I always wanted to be the one who asked the questions, who solved who saw the thing no one else saw, who solved the crime. I mean, whether now it's murder, not the old clock, but I think this has followed me my whole life. So I was writing a mystery novel. I interviewed a famous detective named Mitzi Roberts in Los Angeles, and she works at LAPD Robbery Homicide Division. She is famously Renee Ballard. She's the character that Michael Connelly. She's the person that Michael Connelly based the character of Renee Ballard, the fictional detective, on. She is a badass. And I interviewed her about a fictional work. And I said, as I like to say at the end of interviews, just to bring the vibe up, because sometimes interviews can get a little heavy. I said, what case are you the most proud of? And she said, I'm proud of them all, but I did catch a serial killer once, and that was pretty cool. And I was like, it was the very end, like the check was coming, and I was like, how did I miss this? Like, I buried the lead of this entire story. And she said, I'm not the one asking the questions. And then she told me about Sam Little, this serial killer that she had tracked down and put away when she was working at the cold case special section. And they had a Department of Justice grant in the early 2000s to start running old evidence for DNA. And they got a hit. Then they got another. And then they have the idea that they're on to a serial killer, but he's still out there. So, it was a cross-country manhunt. There was then a third hit and a third DNA hit in LA, and then Sam was indicted. They found him in Louisville, Kentucky, and brought him to LA. where he and extradited him to LA, where he has been convicted and was convicted and served 3 consecutive life sentences for these murders. But she told me there had been so many more across the country. She knew it. And she had tried to mobilize local law enforcement, but interjurisdictional communication is very difficult. And cold case evidence from 30 years ago is, especially in Mississippi, in New Orleans, half of it has been destroyed by Katrina. And it just never caught fire. And I thought, I'm going to put this mystery novel on a shelf. And if you don't mind, I'm going to look into this and see, because maybe I could bring some heat to it. Like, that's the job of a journalist, right? Like, I'm not a cop. I don't work for the FBI, but I could maybe make people start paying attention. So then I started communicating with Sam and decided to write a piece for New York Magazine about him. And that's how the whole thing started.
So you went to visit him in prison for over a year. How did you gain his trust?
Sam was a hard nut to crack. You don't just walk in to a men's maximum security prison to a serial killer who has a 60-year swath of crime in his history, 30 of which involved sexual serial killing, and say, hey, did you kill some people? I spent time building a rapport. And I thought, I'm not going to let this guy bullshit me and waste my time. It took so long even to get into that prison, and every day you waited for hours and hours to even walk in the door, and here I am sitting a foot from a person I know had his hands around the necks of so many women. And I'm not going to do it if he's just going to lie and lie. But this is a person, he's a psychopath. He's transactional. He's not like, oh, I'm going to open up because I feel like it. Oh, I have so much remorse for my crimes. It was a transaction. And he wanted things. And everyone had forgotten about him. He had done this incredible thing. He'd killed more people than perhaps anyone in the country, at least of record. And no one knew. And he was almost 80 and dying. And so, I transacted with him and established a rapport with him. And he said, I wanted TV. And I was like, I want things too.
So it was a quid pro quo.
It was absolutely a quid pro quo. And when I conceived of this, Silence of the Lambs is my favorite movie ever. It's one of those movies, you watch every year, like for me. And I was like, and I, in my imaginary world, sort of based it on that, and then I was sorry what I asked for. I really realized that, life's not a movie, and this killer's not a character. And here I am, and here's this great responsibility. Because he's only decided to talk to me and a Texas Ranger. All of a sudden, there's this torrent of confessions, and I was in far deeper waters than I ever expected to be, and also far more interesting. And I can say I walked out of this a different person than I walked in.
It says that you helped close a few cases that were
I did.
Cold case, yeah?
His confessions with me were different than law enforcement confessions. So, he had the FBI and the Department of Justice getting the major confessions. Then they would call in this sort of line of people from detectives from local jurisdictions, and they'd come from Kentucky and bring him barbecue and bring their cold cases and see if maybe it was Sam. They'd come from Florida and bring him oranges and maybe those cold cases were Sam. And, he was having the time of his life. And I was the only journalist he was talking to throughout this, but detectives ask people different questions than journalists do. So there were a couple of, there were a handful of these closes, these solves that I was able to offer the detail he didn't say to anyone else, whether it was because he was telling the story a different way, he was, and then there was Alice Duvall, which was, a murder I solved from the ground up. That they really had nothing on that. And I just figured out from how long I had been talking to him that he got his directions wrong. And as many times as I drove this scenario that he told me that he had murdered this woman, Alice Duvall, in 91, I couldn't find what he was saying, and I figured out that there was a turn he had made. And I found an article, and that linked the murder with every detail he'd said. I found the space. I found the body dump site, and and I walked into the Long Beach Police Department and said, "Here's a murder." And Rick Jackson, who is the original Harry Bosch, the police officer Harry Bosch is based on. I called him, and he said, "Congratulations, kiddo. You solved a murder. This is an open case. Her name is Alice Denise Duvall." And it really was one of the best moments of my life.
Jillian, on that note, we're going to have to wind down the interview. Thank you so much for coming on. My guest is Jillian Lauren. The book is called Behold the Monster, Confronting America's Most Prolific Serial Killer. Is the book out now?
No, but you can pre-order, and please do, and go to my website at www.jillianlauren.com, and there are pre-order incentives that are very cool. This book is important. I believe in it. I gave it all I have, and I think that true crime fans are going to be really thrilled and gratified by what they read.
Well, thanks again for coming on the show and sharing your incredible stories. And best of luck with the book launch. Hope it does well.
Thank you so much, Douglas.